Unfortunately, what I've also seen with some local prosecutors is this sort of like, I'm going to teach the kids a lesson, not realizing what the laws around child pornography do, and therefore the costs of actually using those to go after minors. But I think there's also just generally in the United States, there's a panic about sexuality. It's totally confusing, it's totally messy. People don't know actually how to handle it. We live in an environment where we strongly encourage abstinence-only education, and so we have this big challenge that we have to deal with. And then the tech companies are at a loss of what to do with it as well. And I guess maybe I'd say...
Okay, so that's a good question. Jack or Michelle, when something like this happens, what's going on inside the company? Because often people simply see the pamphlet that comes out, or they'll see the talking points that are released on a website that's now being created in response. And I'm one of those people who's been behind those. But what's actually happening, to the extent that you can talk about it, behind the scenes in order to assess the situation?
There's a couple levels to this. And just first, before I answer that, just another item that led to the timing of this a few years ago just was the availability of the instruments that you could use to do it. It wasn't that long ago that price and availability of the devices made sexting amongst teens kind of not possible because they didn't have cell phones that took cameras and price plans that allowed them to send them. So that happened those few years ago because the timing of availability of the devices themselves, that fell into place. So to answer your question, what do we do? I think, at the first level, we look at it as, well, what happened? Because the first notion is sexting, cell phone, text, and that's not necessarily the case. It could be it happens through a social media application on the device. It could be that a cell phone wasn't involved at all, or the cell phone was only the receiving instrument. So, at the first level, you need to think about, well, what happened, and was it something that was inconsistent with either the terms of service that govern that product, and was it actually something that was part of our operation at all? And I think what we found was that most of the time there was lack of clarity about what happened, so you couldn't get to what was the problem. Was it a phone-to-phone message? If that's a peer-to-peer private communication, there's no technology that we have available to deal with that. If it's over an application, let's say Facebook to MySpace, that's actually a Facebook-MySpace issue. It might have been done over an internet connection that we supplied or over a device that we supplied, but it's a separate application. So there was a lot of confusion over where is this problem and who should act. And then the second layer of that was that then what action should be taken was complicated. I'm not a lawyer, so I can't get into all of the details of the legality and illegality of things. But for the most part, if it was a peer-to-peer private message between two people, we don't have much recourse, and we're not able to take action in those cases.
Okay, so what do you say to the parent? Because I see many times what happens, and we've all been people who've said this for many other reasons. They should, and you fill in the blank, right? In this situation, they should, meaning Verizon, Sprint, T-Mobile, ATT, you name it, Facebook, MySpace, Twitter, they should do something about it. And that resonates very well in the political circles, in the NGO circles, in the policy circles. How do you respond to a situation like that, Michelle?
In the CSR department at Sprint, we kind of refer to these...
CSR meaning corporate social responsibility.
Thank you. We kind of refer to these as the wireless social issues that arise because there are benefits to our product and services, but then there are also unintended consequences. And so we just always look at addressing both sides of it and making sure that we have education available and technological solutions. so that there are applications, to control things and parental controls, and then also that there's education available and that we're thinking of them. A couple of years ago, sexting was definitely, not such a problem, and texting while driving is becoming an issue. So there more and more as our culture, continues on where that these issues do arise, and we just want to make sure, that we give our consumers choices, that we don't come out and say, this is the best way to handle it because it's different for every person, for every family, for every situation, but that we have an open platform where there's applications they can choose, there's educational initiatives that they can talk to with their children, because there is no way, to fully protect them and just turn everything off. They are going to have to deal with these issues. So we just want to make sure that they do have choices.
So I want to jump in here because the other thing is, I hear it all the time that companies should do X, and one of the things that worries me is that a lot of companies actually do X, and that's not necessarily the X you want them to be doing. Namely, that most companies that are, especially companies that are big enough, do a lot of abiding by the reporting laws in the child pornography laws, which means they take anything that might be classed as child pornography, and they usually take a broader stroke than the narrow one, and they report it, reasonably so, to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children as part of their relationship with them. This is when law gets involved. And you know what? The one thing that, if anything you learn from those cases that Hemu read off, when the law gets involved in kids being stupid, it doesn't usually end up really well, right? And the costs for being prosecuted under the child pornography laws, until some of these states have started changing their statutes, are unbelievable. We're talking kids that are no longer eligible for any form of financial aid to go to college, kids who can't live within 100 yards of schools or libraries because they're registered sex offenders, kids who can't date, kids who have to report things, et cetera, et cetera. This is not necessarily what you want to do. So part of it is that getting the tech company involved, the way that they can get involved at scale is by doing things like reporting, and that's not necessarily the ideal outcome at all. So I think part of the challenges for the tech industry is actually to figure out what is a sort of more productive way to actually engage in these issues. And I think most tech company folks are sitting there scratching their head being like, I don't know, but we don't think that getting kids into trouble is the right answer.
Okay, so let me ask and I know we prepped a little before this, but this topic didn't come up. If you had a parent sitting there, you had a child sitting there, and you said there's something that you can say to them to say, wake up, understand it, don't panic, but understand it, and these are the ramifications. How do you make that happen? Especially starting with the kids, because we always debate on whether there should be education, whether there should be required curriculum and things like that. But what do you say to do it so that nobody's focusing on the company and saying they should? It's kind of taken care of before the panic occurs or before that happens. Right? In other words, do something before the call comes in from the government saying who's to blame here, and then things happen. Anybody?
Well, I'll go first. Just I want to add on to the comments that Danah made. Our first reaction is to think that there must be a technology solution, because that's what we do. That's our gut reaction. And so our first steps were to give consumers tools to meter how much service they use. And we have usage controls, and they let you manage calls and messages. We have filters that let you filter all of our services, text messages, apps, web, etc. And I think, once you do that and then realize, as Danah pointed out in her opening remarks, that there's all of these different circumstances, it becomes clear that these tools are a part of your arsenal to deal with the challenge, but they're not the solution. In fact, one of the tools that's helpful in this area that's been available before we had all these cool applications was just a detailed bill. You could look at the bill and see who your kids are calling and receiving calls from, and could have had that conversation years ago. And as I said, what we're starting to see now are applications and services that help consumers learn about their use of services, telecommunication services, wireless services, applications, so they can talk about it, hopefully, before the problem happens. But then again, that only deals with a certain segment of the challenge. So as we step back and look at what is our role as a technology company, as a service provider in this, a part of it is tools that help manage it, but it's also connecting to that good source of information on what to do with the tool, when to challenge a child, when to let them learn, and that's a very personal thing between the caregiver and the child, and that's not an area that we think we should be involved in on a person-to-person basis,
So-
but facilitating